Lesson 7. Reconstruction.
The big idea.
Congress opposed Lincoln's and Johnson's plans for Reconstruction and instead implemented its own plan to rebuild the South.
Why it matters now.
Reconstruction was an important step in African Americans' struggle for civil rights.
One American's story.
As a young man, Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Abraham Lincoln as president, entered politics in Tennessee. He won several important offices, including those of congressman, governor, and U.S. senator. After secession, Johnson was the only senator from a Confederate state to remain loyal to the Union. A former slave owner, by 1863, Johnson supported abolition. He hated wealthy Southern planters, whom he held responsible for dragging poor whites into the war. Early in 1865, he endorsed harsh punishment for the rebellion's leaders.
The time has arrived when the American people should understand what crime is, and that it should be punished, and its penalties enforced and inflicted. Treason must be made odious. Traitors must be punished and impoverished. Their social power must be destroyed. I say, as to the leaders, punishment. I say leniency, conciliation, and amnesty to the thousands whom they have misled and deceived.
Andrew Johnson, quoted in Reconstruction, the Ending of the Civil War. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States. On becoming president, Johnson faced the issue of whether to punish or pardon former Confederates. He also faced the larger problem of how to bring the defeated Confederate states back into the Union. The politics of Reconstruction. The need to help former slaves was just one of many issues the nation confronted after the war. In addition, the government, led by Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president and eventual successor, had to determine how to bring the Confederate states back into the Union. Reconstruction, the period during which the United States began to rebuild after the Civil War, lasted from 1865 to 1877. The term also refers to the process the federal government used to readmit the defeated Confederate states to the Union. Complicating the process was the fact that Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, and the members of Congress all had different ideas about how Reconstruction should be handled. Lincoln's plan. Lincoln made it clear that he favored a lenient Reconstruction policy. In December 1863, Lincoln announced his proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction, also known as the 10% Plan. Under this plan, the government would pardon all Confederates, except high-ranking officials and those accused of crimes against prisoners of war, who would swear allegiance to the Union. As soon as 10% of those who had voted in 1860 took this oath of allegiance, a Confederate state could form a new state government and send representatives and senators to Congress. Under Lincoln's terms, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee moved toward readmission to the Union. However, Lincoln's Reconstruction Plan angered a minority of Republicans in Congress, known as Radical Republicans. The Radicals, led by Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts and Representative Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania, wanted to destroy the political power of former slaveholders. Most of all, they wanted African Americans to be given full citizenship and the right to vote. Johnson's Reconstruction Plan. Lincoln was assassinated before he could fully implement his Reconstruction Plan. He was succeeded by Andrew Johnson, a Tennessee Democrat and a states' rights advocate. Johnson had been selected to be Lincoln's running mate in the 1864 election as a way to broaden the base of the Republican Party. Less than 6 weeks after his inauguration as vice president, Johnson succeeded to the presidency. His tenure was marked by constant conflict with radical Republicans in Congress, whose views on the treatment of the defeated South differed sharply from his. In May 1865, Johnson announced his own plan, which differed little from Lincoln's. The major difference was that Johnson tried to break the planters' power by excluding high-ranking Confederates and wealthy Southern landowners from taking the oath needed for voting privileges. However, Johnson also pardoned more than 13,000 former Confederates because he believed that white men alone must manage the South. The remaining ex-Confederate states quickly agreed to Johnson's terms. In the following months, all these states except Texas set up new state governments and elected representatives to Congress. In December 1865, the new Southern legislators arrived in Washington to take their seats. Congress, however, refused to admit them. At the same time, moderate Republicans pushed for new laws to remedy weaknesses they saw in Johnson's plan. In February 1866, Congress voted to continue and enlarge the Freedmen's Bureau. Congress had established the Bureau in the last month of the war. It assisted former slaves and poor whites in the South by distributing clothing and food. In addition, the Freedmen's Bureau set up more than 40 hospitals, approximately 4,000 schools, 61 industrial institutes, and 74 teacher training centers. 2 months after enlarging the Freedmen's Bureau, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The new law gave African Americans citizenship and forbade states from passing discriminatory laws, black codes, that severely restricted African Americans' lives.
The Freedmen's Bureau.
The politics of Reconstruction. The need to help former slaves was Johnson shocked everyone when he vetoed both the Freedmen's Bureau Act and the Civil Rights Act. Congress, Johnson contended, had gone far beyond anything contemplated by the authors of the Constitution. Congressional Reconstruction. Angered by Johnson's actions, radical and moderate Republican factions decided to work together to shift the control of the Reconstruction process from the executive branch to the legislature. In mid-1866, they overrode the president's vetoes of the Civil Rights Act and Freedmen's Bureau Act. In addition, Congress drafted the 14th Amendment, which prevented states from denying rights and privileges to any U.S. citizen, now defined as all persons born or naturalized in the United States. This definition was expressly intended to overrule and nullify the Dred Scott decision. Major Reconstruction legislation, 1865 to 1870. In the 1866 elections, moderate and radical Republicans gained control of Congress. They joined together to pass the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which did not recognize any of the state governments formed under the Lincoln and Johnson plans, except Tennessee. The act divided the former Confederate states into 5 military districts. The states were required to grant African American men the vote and to ratify the 14th Amendment in order to re-enter the Union. When Johnson vetoed the Reconstruction legislation, Congress promptly overrode the veto.
Historical source.
The fight over Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Act of 1867 became a source of great contention between President Johnson and leaders of Congress. A dispute about how to treat former Confederate states soon blossomed into a greater conflict about who should control the nation's Reconstruction policies. Andrew Johnson.
Military governments, established for an indefinite period, would have divided the people into the vanquishers and the vanquished, and would have envenomed hatred rather than have restored affection. The policy would have implied that the states whose inhabitants may have taken part in the rebellion had, by the act of those inhabitants, ceased to exist. But the true theory is that all pretended acts of secession were, from the beginning, null and void.
Andrew Johnson. Quoted in History of the Impeachment of Andrew Johnson, Thaddeus Stevens.
Unless the law of nations is a dead letter, the late war between two acknowledged belligerents severed their original compacts and broke all ties that bound them together. The future condition of the conquered power depends on the will of the conqueror. They must come in as new states or remain as conquered provinces. Congress, the Senate and House of Representatives, with the concurrence of the President, is the only power that can act in the matter.
Thaddeus Stevens. Quoted in History of the 39th Congress of the United States,